Dear students, it so happens when we speak about multicellular organisms, there are more cells. There is a need that the cells in a multicellular organism need to communicate. How do they communicate? They communicate because of many important type of cell-cell interactions. But for a cell-cell interaction to take place, there is a need of two important molecules. One, a signal molecule, which are usually ligand molecules, and then the second one, the signal molecules being received by another cell, and to receive the signal molecules, the receiver cell, the cell which needs to undergo the change, they should have on them specific molecules called as receptors. So in this class, let us get to know what are receptors, the types of receptors, and how the receptors play a very, very important role in signal mediation. In other words, we can call them as signal transduction. So what are receptors? Receptors are usually protein molecules present on the target cells. And these receptors, they might be present on the surface of the target cells. They're usually present sometimes on the surface, or sometimes they might be inside the target cells also. So, to this receptor molecules, there is a need of binding of another type of molecules called as chemical signals, and we call these chemical signals as ligand molecules. So, please keep in mind for a cell to undergo or a cell to respond to an extracellular signal, you will be having one a donor cell, the other one is a target cell. Donor cells usually produce chemical signals called as ligand molecules. The target cells or the receiver cells are the one which receive these ligand molecules, but for them to receive, they need receptors. And these receptors, they might be present on the surface of a target cell, or sometimes they might be present inside the cytoplasm of a target cell. As a result, we have two types of receptors. One we call them as internal receptors, the other one we call them as cell surface receptors. So, coming to the first one, what are internal receptors? Internal receptors are also known as intracellular receptors or cytoplasmic receptors. Where do we find them? We find them in the cytoplasm of the target cells. And these receptors, they are able to take the ligand molecules which are hydrophobic in nature, and they're able to travel across the plasma membrane. Inside the cell, it so happens the ligand molecules, as they are bound to the receptor molecules, now this ligand receptor complex, they can try to bring about the regulators. They can act as regulators for transcription and then translations, which mainly mediate gene expression. It so happens when the ligand binds to the receptor, there is a complex formed. This complex brings about change the conformation, where this now tries to bring about the expression of the genes. Either they might enhance the expression of the genes or they might silence the particular gene expression. Now, when I speak about internal receptors, they directly influence the gene expression without having to pass the signal onto the other receptors or messengers. The next type of this particular picture depicts about a receptor which is present inside the cytoplasm, signal molecule coming from an donor cell. They get into the cytoplasm of a target cell. As they come in, they will bind and form a complex. As they form a complex, now they are going to bring about change the conformation, and this they can go and act upon a particular sequence of a DNA, and that might be a gene which is very important or a gene which needs to be knocked out, and thereby the gene expression is either enhanced or it is silenced. The next type of receptor what we are going to speak about is cell surface receptors, also known as transmembrane receptors, where this transmembrane receptors are the receptors which can bind to the signal molecules externally. Please keep in mind the word transmembrane receptor says that Part of the receptor is exposed outside the cell and part of it is inside the cytoplasm of the cell. Since they receive the signals from the outside, they are having the capacity to transduce the extracellular signal into an intercellular signal, and thereby it so happens they might bring about the gene expression changes, where this gene expression changes they might have severe consequences, and the consequences might be a better one or it might be a malfunction one. There are cases of high blood pressure, asthma, heart disease, and cancers. Now, why this might happen? This might happen because the receptors which are present on the target cell, they would have undergone some change. There would have gone some change in the protein structure, errors in the protein structure. So, a very important concept is if we have the gene expression to happen properly in the right way, it so happens there is a need of the binding of the receptor and the ligand molecule. This particular picture speaks about a transmembrane receptor where you see a receptor where part of the molecule is exposed outside the cell and you have the other part of your receptor which is which is spanning your plasma membrane and then getting into the cytoplasm. So for this type of receptor, if a ligand molecule is bound, the ligand molecule, what they do is that they bind to the external surface of your receptor, wherein now what happens, this will try to activate the other molecules present in the cell, and those molecules usually we call them as secondary messengers, which will be studied in the later parts of this particular chapter. Now where this secondary messengers might get activated and try to bring about the cell response in either a positive way or a negative way.